Hey Collective, it's Al, and today's video is going to be accompanying a blog post I'm putting on LinkedIn which centers around the topic of sudden change or shifts in energy that kind of put us for a bit of a jolt in our lives. And what I wanted to really do with the post was kind of refocus our energy as conscious leaders or as spiritual beings in general on the upliftment that actually comes with it. Because one of the things that we've learned as we evolve and grow as beings in general is that change always brings a certain amount of chaos, but it is through the chaos that we most grow and evolve as beings. And so what I really wanted to focus our energy on was kind of all of the different examples that kind of permeate our senses with past experiences that have taught us that though something can seem disastrous to us at a specific time in our life, looking back upon it in hindsight always reveals that it was a blessing in disguise, or that it somehow brought you true value or sudden change into your life that made you actually turn out in a better position that you had started. And one of the great lessons and blessings that comes with that type of knowledge is that you begin to really lean into changes that happen in your life, and you learn to just trust the universal design and what it's trying to do for you. And the piece really centered around the idea of us as a collective really focusing our attention on befriending change and understanding that it tends to know us better. It's like a part of the divine hand handing you an adjustment, a realignment that is somehow going to reward you further down the road into self-manifestation or mastery. And so one of the things that we as a peer group, as people on LinkedIn or people in general who see this, can do for each other is really start to celebrate the experiences that we're having in the long term as leaders and as kind of guides or mentors for other people, and helping them kind of understand that what once looked like a curse upon our life or a sudden change for bad luck, that actually somehow played a bigger hand in rewarding us in much bigger ways down the road. And specifically, the example I wanted to use has a lot to do with why I haven't really been posting videos or anything with my blog posts, has been because I've been in the middle of sudden shifts in my own life. Apparently, I must have a little bit of good karma because I suddenly went from a studio apartment to a one-bedroom. And though when it first came to me, I was a little taken back by it because I didn't have the furniture that I needed for the place. And I kind of started to backpedal a little bit on the opportunity, and I realized that it was just fear that I wouldn't be able to, how to put all the furniture in the house, and I just kind of I got over it. But one of the things that it revealed in the process was how many times we allow fear or insecurity or the past to hold us back from moving forward and looking back at our lives and using sudden shifts and change as crutches towards not actually leaning into whatever it is that's being offered to us now, believing that what happened then will then happen now. And so we have to kind of sometimes just trust ourselves and trust the universe and knowing that if it presents us with an opportunity that it's meant to be, and that you just have to learn to go with it. And so one of the things that it revealed to me as I was going through the stresses of like the extra financial burden, if you will, but it's not really burden, but just like, bills that I have to now pay and all that stuff that are added onto my day-to-day, I wasn't really sure how I was going to pay for everything because of the fact that it wasn't really thought out thoroughly ahead of time because it happened so quickly. And what I ended up having to do was just actually have to center my energy and understand that the change was happening for a reason, and that if I just trusted the system in place, that everything would work out. And sure enough, I think it was maybe 2 days ago, I suddenly got this opportunity to be doing this really kind of awesome event on the 15th for Hollywood that I'm going to be taking part of as working it essentially. And it's going to help me kind of balance a couple of the books and so forth. And so what it reminded me was exactly what we're talking about, which is that every now and then we as mere mortals, if you will, get lost in the struggle that once was, forgetting that it doesn't have to exist in the now. And one of the greatest examples that came to me actually as I was dreaming the other day was I was in the middle of a conversation with someone in particular who I've yet to actually meet in real life, but that I met in this dream, and we were talking about family. And specifically one of the things that they were struggling with in the dream was the issue of divorce and the ramifications that it's having on them psychologically, and how they really feel very burdened by the experience and how much it's bringing them down. And one of the revelations that came to me through this whole process, because everything is synchronized, right? Nothing ever happens accidentally. I remember in the dream specifically saying, yes, but the person that you were in that relationship is no longer a person. That has evolved. And the possibility is that whoever you're meant to be with for the rest of your life is now available to you because you've learned the lessons from this particular relationship. And with that knowledge, you can then move forward into a brand new life experience where all of your dreams come true. And one of the things that it revealed to me in the thought process was how many times in the past I myself have gone through breakups of a big, that were severe. And I remember feeling very devastated by the experience. And now, with all these years under my belt, I look back on it and I just thank goodness that it didn't work out, that I wasn't ready, or the person that I was trying to be wasn't my authentic self. Because, for a long time, my spirituality was something I kept under the hat. And people already found me a little bit weird because I was very authentic to who I was and I really didn't care what other people thought, but it was misaligned. And so I realized that the person that I am today could never have coexisted with the people that I was once coveting and that I once wanted to be a part of, because we weren't growing at the same rate, and because who I was wasn't truthful. And I was still hiding, some of the more glorious gifts that I have spiritually under the belief that people would find me strange. And so now looking back upon it, what I realized is that we as leaders and as industry people and people in general throughout the world, we go through this period where we think that the worst thing that's happening to us is going to last forever, and that there is nothing better waiting for us, that there's no rainbow or light at the end of the tunnel, never realizing that the divine never puts anything in our path that is insurmountable. Instead, all of these realignments and these changes that occur to our life are meant to make us stronger and help us rise quicker and faster and more efficiently and more gloriously in our own truth and our own power. And so as I was thinking about the topic of divorce, and specifically I was also speaking to breakups between business partners and stuff, and how that can be even sometimes more problematic because of how the sheer amount of people that are always affiliated with that type of breakup part, right? And what I realized in those situations is that you never know what it is that the change is saving you from. And that's really what I wanted to focus our energy on, which is that specific topic. You never know what the person that you're dealing with is up to at the time that the sudden shift or sudden change or the breakup or the divorce comes into play. And you never really know if you had stayed in that dynamic, if you would have been the recipient of whatever the karma that was owed to them. And so in a weird way, with hindsight, you start to realize that you start to see their life progression, and you realize that if you would have been entangled in that your life would have spiraled even further down. And what it revealed to me is that sometimes what we do is that we don't want to change things because many of us fall into this categorization of where we would rather be miserable to some degree and save face publicly because of conditioning, that we would rather stay in that lifestyle than to actually branch out and admit that we just weren't growing or that it just wasn't working, because we were so involved in the dream of what could have been that we neglect the reality of what was and the unhappiness that befell everyone involved in the situation, because we're so used to wanting everything to go exactly the way we wanted, never realizing that there's much better things awaiting us if we should just let go of the control issues, right? And so, I was going to pull my hair back, but never mind. But the point is that we as a human kingdom have this way of trying to always monopolize things and to have everything our way, blocking ourselves from true bliss further down the road, right? Because we get entangled in this idea that the person that we're involved with, whether it's business, personal, or otherwise, that whatever it is that we are dreaming up of them and wanting the best of from them, that actually exists because we're putting all of our energy into making that happen, never realizing that in the process what we've done is we've depleted our energy, made us spiral, possibly begin drinking more, doing more drugs, being more sexually promiscuous, which would have never happened if we would just admitted that it just wasn't working. And so what I wanted to really focus the energy here as I spoke to you guys, was on grounding that information and realizing that no matter how old or how young you are, sometimes the most traumatic experiences make you the better man and the better woman. And what it does is it provides you with the life experience to then go forward into our universe and manifest and create the true life that you've always wanted. The one that is unbuffered, the one that allows you to be truly who you are in a public setting with one other person or whoever other people, and it allows that vibration to match yours so that you do evolve together as opposed to evolving apart because of the fact that you're not being completely honest with your needs or with who you truly are or how much effort you've been putting into making something real that wasn't. And it reminded me of that thing where I remember specifically thinking back to one of the posts I'd previously done where I had made mention about the fact that when you are handed something divinely, like let's say it's a gift of knowledge, intellect, wisdom, beauty, harmony, music, whatever it is, it's always yours. It's something that can never be taken from you. But anything that is not built on a solid foundation of truth, honesty, integrity, humility, kindness, and compassion can then be shaken apart. And that's what shut-in shifts are, right? That is what happens when we experience towers, which, if for those of you who don't know, a tower is literally a moment in your life where things come crumbling down because they were never built on a stable foundation. And what can be more illuminating to that experience than the topic of divorce or separation of assets and so forth? And one of the things that it really, really speaks to is the control issues that we all have and believing that if we fail, that it's going to perpetuate itself because it's happened one or two times before. But it reminds me of that adage where people roll the dice and they think that because they keep rolling it, that it's going to change, never realizing that, or that it'll be the same because you're rolling in the same gesture in the same way, never realizing that at any point luck can change and then you roll the perfect hand. And it's one of those truths that most people don't really, really address because we get so lost in the emotional entanglement to whatever we're feeling a loss at that we don't see the horizon for the growth that it's now providing us. And we don't see the joy and the celebration that's going to come from becoming the man or woman you were always meant to be once you learn the lessons and convert them into the blessings of the future. Because the person that you then attract, having mastered the divorce and having mastered where you may have overindulged or where you have fallen or whatever where you're going through, when you master that, you no longer even pay that much attention to the mistakes. You just don't do them anymore. And you take the lessons and you actually experience what we call a glow up, where your life then becomes the truth, authentic nature to who you are. And so you attract the person that is most likely to warm your heart again naturally, where there won't be any pressure, there won't be any type of animosity, there won't be a conflict system, there won't be any reason to lie to each other, because the older you get and the more you experience in life and the more changes that you've incurred as you've progressed, the more solid you become in your sense of worth and who you are and who you want and what it is that you are willing to put up with and what you're not. But notice you would never be able to get to that point when you are still suffering through the trauma of the change, of the shakeup. In spiritual terms, we call it the great realignments, right? And some people have a midlife crisis, that's another way of saying it, but spiritually speaking, realignment is basically this idea where the divine, God, Allah, the Buddha, whatever you believe in, sees the path that you're heading down and knows that if you continue down that path, you may not just tank yourself and your life, but you're going to tank everyone that's involved in the situation with you. And so what it sometimes does is for your own good, it'll throw a monkey wrench into your life so as to make you face your shadow, so as to make you see where you're falling apart or where you're stressing yourself out or where your shortcomings are really hurting other people. And what it does is it makes you then look into the mirror and really get to the crux of why this is happening. And so what it does is it then builds the knowledge base for you, like a computer, to then run the next program without making the same pitfalls, without doing the same things, and showing up for the experience 100% different from who you were last relationship. But that can only happen if you honestly allow the change to be your best friend and to help you realize that it saved you from something you can't know and that you probably don't want to know. Because what happens for a lot of us is when sudden changes happen and deteriorations of relationships occur, we get into this stagnation period where we need to heal, but we sometimes block out the experiences that are then meant to be there for us, believing that there's a certain amount of time or a certain thing that you must do in order to get from point A to point B, never realizing that sometimes you just have good karma. And sometimes the person that you're meant to be with, you will meet the next day after you sign the divorce proceedings. Like, you never know what destiny has in mind for you. And the one thing I will say is that you never allow the fear to then stop you from taking the chances that you need to take because you've learned. And that's the big lesson from the piece, is when sudden change happens, it always provides you with growth. It is the epitome of evolution, and it gets you from point A to point Z. It knows where you would have fallen. It knows what would have happened. You don't need to know that. You don't always need to know what would have happened in a false system of security, in a state where you were trying to please someone all the time, or where you lost yourself to the relationship and lost your own empowerment as you went. Sometimes you just have to wash your hands of it and realize that it was never a stable foundation to begin with. And that is especially true in business and in working relationships, where no matter how much you love someone or no matter how much you care about a product or a dream or a vision, if the wrong people are mixed into the situation, then you never know what legalities or issues might come down the road from unethical behavior on other people's parts. And so sometimes what we feel like is a huge traumatic experience where we have a loss, especially in business with finances and so forth, where things crumble, you never really know unless you're really, really aware that what happens somehow saves you agony instead of hurt feelings down the road. And so when we encounter sudden shifts, because we as a collective are heading towards a lot of change, right? And we know it. We feel it on a government scale. We feel it economically. We feel it all over the place. The way that you respond to the stimulation is going to tell you exactly where you are. And let's go back to the experience of a divorce, let's say. Have you ever noticed that you can always tell where someone is on the evolutionary ladder by how they adjust to the change of a divorce? Because there are several different types of people that fall on a scale, right? One of the lowest forms can be where they just go after each other and tear each other apart financially, and they ruin their entire lives, and they make their children hate them and all that stuff. And then there's the higher end where there are people who just realize that they're just going to have to take a loss just to keep the family peace. One of them is not going to get as much money as the other one, and they just kind of let it go so as to focus their energy on their children, right? And that the children that they love are the most important things to them. And whatever the dynamic is between the two divorcing parents becomes a secondary idea to the importance of the family, right? So that's the sliding scale. But have you ever noticed that when people go through sheer change like divorce, that some of them fall into the category of castigating the relationship in a negative way because of the last 2 years, even though they were married, let's say 15, and 10 of them were absolutely glorious. So they show themselves, and you show yourself where you are on the evolutionary ladder by how you react to the divorce proceedings. And if you take the higher road where need be, or if you decide to not be snarky towards each other, because what it shows that you have evolved to a place where you remember why you loved them, or why you went into business with them, or why they were your friend, and you learn to just let it go and understand that it's not the last moments that brought everything down that you should focus your energy on. The lesson and the blessing is an experience and the shared experience you had with each other, no matter how it ends. And that's super important, right? Because how many of us have seen our friends go through something like this, or a breakup or whatnot, and they completely destroy each other out of a sense of ego or pride, never realizing that they have children who are observing this. And they don't realize that the world is watching it as well. And though it's not important to ever think about other people's opinions, it does sometimes give you a snapshot of where you are on the playing field. And so when I was writing the piece, one of the things I really, really wanted to focus on is this idea of perspective. Because when people say chaos, because I opened it with the Deepak Chopra quote, which I thought was really apropos. But one of the things about chaos is it is a subjective term. Because what can seem chaotic to someone else might be every day to the person who's experiencing it. Or the person experiencing might be looking at someone else thinking that life is completely chaotic, and it makes complete sense to the other person. It just kind of depends on what their MO is in life and if they are well adjusted enough to really deal with the waves that come with life, right? Because when you learn to ride the waves of change, then you master your experience. Because it's in the way that you interact with the world around you that then dictates how the world then interacts with you. And I know that sounds very up here and kind of like very analytical and very spiritual nonsense to some of you. I can assure you that when you align yourself in a place of growing into the change and leaning into whatever it is that the divine is trying to give you, that your life just gets much better, and you start to notice that the karmic wheel turns more in your favor, where suddenly great things start to happen in quick succession, and things that you thought would be a problem are not a problem because it's not the same as the past. You've grown and you're leaning into where the divine is taking you, whatever you call that energy to be. And so as I sat there and I really, really thought about the dream and the person I was speaking to, I just remember thinking, because I know this person just from a social standpoint, and I remember thinking how incredibly, what a big bright light they are to the world, and how much they bring into the universe with humanitarian effort, and how enlightened I find them to be spiritually, but how they were they were wounded, and they were healing the wound in a way that needed some friendship, right? Because sometimes the best way to heal a wounded heart is just in friendship, without any type of sexual dynamic or whatnot, because you don't ever want to rush into something like that. But what I'm saying is that in the dream, the only thing I really needed to do for the person was to just explain to them that though the experience is very hurtful at the moment, I can guarantee, because I saw the future in the dream, that the outcome will be everything they've always wanted, because they're now ready to have that. Whereas before, the only thing they could have was the dream they were holding of an impossible life that could never exist, because it was based on a false reality. It wasn't based on the truth. One was trying to manipulate the other, and in doing that, the other constantly felt strained and felt under control and felt like it couldn't breathe and started to act out in ways that damaged the relationship further. But the truth of the dream was that the person who was being the manipulator was the one who actually demolished the relationship, only now played the victim in the long term. And I remember in the dream specifically stating very clearly, and without passing judgment on either side, I said, look, in the end, this was never a sustainable dynamic. There was too much other people's opinions involved in the relationship. And it was a public relationship. And that adds another layer. So what I ended up saying, and what I'll say to you all in this post, is that when you have a very high profile couple, and this is for many because business tycoons, I mean, we know a lot of people, right? This is LinkedIn. It doesn't have to be celebrities or famous people. It can, sorry, I have like a little whisker here. It doesn't have to be famous people like that, but industry leaders, people of high profile, get into relationships. And one of the biggest dangers that I've noticed in observing it from the standpoint of a spiritualist is that because you get so used to a public persona that you push outwardly out of pride, ego, or just because it's better business, you then have to always make sure that you don't bring that falseness into the relationship, where you start to sweep things under the rug so as to not have conflict or not to have debate or argument. Because if you don't live authentically, then you're not ever going to be able to grow together. And that was the big thing that I saw in the relationship that I was speaking to in the dream, was that they were both at a place where they would rather not deal with it until it got to a point where they had to deal with it. And so the blessing that the person is going to have is that the very next relationship is going to be a completely different relationship from the relationship that was very high public profile. Now, it won't change. There will still be both public profile people from what I saw in the dream. But the difference will be that the relationship will take priority over whatever anyone else thinks because this guy learned the lesson from the previous one. And so now the dream can be pulled into his reality because he's ready to sacrifice what he needs to sacrifice, either ego, publicly, whatever it is. I mean, it was like a bunch of things, but I'm just giving it as an example. But he is now able to receive the perfect partner because the perfect partner has evolved with him, but not together. And that's one of the things about change in general, is that when we get big shakeups in our life, we never realize that we might be being realigned to someone who is equally going through the experience, but with someone else. So that when you two cross each other's paths, the world blossoms because you both reach the same destination with the same value system, with the same experiences, but with different people, so as to not carry the drama, karma, and all the baggage that comes from that relationship, even if children are involved, which I thought was a very interesting point. Because by the time that the two paths now collide with each other, they're going to be blessed with the warmth and knowingness of each other, and knowing that they can count on each other without having to put effort into the relationship, because they've learned that with all that effort, they just hid themselves and they wore fake masks. And then there was this whole thing about, sexuality and all this other stuff that was, kind of in the back burner. And it just reminded me in writing this post, which is that sometimes for those people, because I felt really like a heart space for this, because it was kind of at the end of the dream. It wasn't with this person, but it was an exiting thought, which was, I can't even imagine what it must be like to be in the closet or be in whatever situation it is where you are somehow hiding who you truly are in order to make someone happy. Because at some point, in some way, that manifests into a massive breakdown, right? And it manifests into, I don't know, I think it was like alcoholism, drug addiction, sexual addiction. I mean, it manifests itself into a much more broader scale than what would have normally happened if they just would have been a little bit more honest with themselves. But you can't ever really know yourself until you engage the change and you learn from it. And that's really where I wanted to focus our energy with right now, because of so much sheer change coming towards us. I mean, there's so much that has to change in our world. And if we don't show up in our lives in a way that stands in truth, honor, integrity, and empowerment for ourselves, then we can never really lean into all of what's about to happen. And a lot of it's going to send us for spirals, and it's meant to, because we have to evolve. That is the point of evolution. Change is evolution. So as you read the post and as you take this video in, understand that it's not a place where I'm speaking down to anybody. What I'm saying is I'm matching someone who is going through something, and I'm relating to them without ever really knowing them, because what I do relate to is the experience of where they're going now with the blessings that came from all of the heartbreak and all of the lessons that they learned. And it's something that I want everyone to really, really take in for no matter what situation you're in. Many of you are suddenly having to change jobs and doing career shifts out of nowhere. Some of you are breaking up with people that you've been in relationships for a long time. Some of you will meet somebody really soon that's going to happen at a social event, or maybe like at a working event, or whatever it is coming up. And it's going to be up to you to embrace the opportunity that presents itself in that moment by releasing the past and carrying the blessings, having let go of the lessons, showing up for yourself, and literally looking at the world as full of opportunity and possibilities. Because if you do that, then whenever change arrives in your life, it will always be for the positive, because you know that the divine is guiding you always somewhere. I mean, if you really think back to some of the more traumatic experiences we've had with massive breakups, or when we hit rock bottom at something and whatnot, It is how we rose from those ashes that always matches us to our peer group. And it helps guide us into leadership, and it helps guide us into better fatherhood and motherhood. Because if you really think about it, the person that you become through all of the adversity is a person who then is the empowering figure that represents the ideal situation for your children. Because your children can then identify that you've been through it, you've snorted it, you've done it, everything that you could possibly do, you've done. So when they come to you, it's not like a passive aggressive thing where like, oh yeah, sure, you know what you're talking, but they'll really get it because of how you got yourself back up. And when they see that, it bonds you closer to your family because they're meeting the real you, the person you were always meant to become because of the karmic situations that you've been through. And I'll end on that. For those of you who don't know what a karmic is, it's a spiritual reference that we adhere to, which speaks to people who are put in our life path throughout our journeys that are specifically there at a specific time to teach us a lesson. And what they're specifically meant to do is they're meant to trip us up or to engage us in activities that will most propel growth when it fails. And one of the things that happens with that, which can be a little triggering, is that they tend to be what we call soulmate lookalikes, for those of you in personal dynamics, where we start off really hot and heavy, it's a beautiful situation, but it's very lust-driven. And suddenly there's a lot of bickering, and suddenly there's a lot of tension that's not needed to be there. And you start to realize that they're not there for your highest good, they're there for X, Y, and Z other reason. And it starts to become a strain, and the game that you must play is how many times are you going to go into the same cycle with the same type of person over and over again till you exit the karmic cycle, and then you go on to your reward season. And so that's one of the things that I kind of wanted to end on, is understand that change is a constant best friend. It always surrounds you and inundates you at the exact right moment where you need it in order to realign you to a point in your life where you can be rewarded for good work and for doing the work of self-discovery and self-mastery. But it depends a lot on how you respond to the stimulation around you that will show you where you are on the evolutionary ladder. And for you business leaders, there comes a point sometimes where you evolve in a different direction than the people you're working with. And you have to ask yourself, who are you living your life for? And so if your answer is honest sometimes, and it's that you're evolving in a different direction, but you're letting all of the strain of responsibility to hold you in place, you become what's called stagnant. And let me tell you something about stagnation. It makes everybody in the situation miserable. Because in business, you start to act out, you become reckless, you become more anger ball, and you start to fight and all of this stuff, and everyone in the situation loses. But if you grow and you admit that it's just not working, that you just want to go in a different direction, then the other person has the opportunity to meet you at eye level and say, yeah, me too. And at least you have a better shot than just letting everything implode. And so that's kind of what the post was about. It's just about us as a collective, and especially as conscious leaders, understanding that to be conscious is to lean into transition and to understand that if it's happening in your life, you're just going to have to trust that it's taking you to a destination that you can't know yet because you're not ready. But when you are ready, it's going to be because of every single karmic lesson that you've learned in the past. So whether it's divorce, whether it's in business, whether it's in loss of friendship, whatever it is, when you learn the lesson, not only does it become a blessing, but you then honor the experience you had with the person and you thank them by letting them go, and you get freedom. And that is what freedom is. It's the ability to let go and let God. And when that happens, your heart sings, your life fills with joy, and things start to go much more in your direction and in the way you wanted. Because you show up for yourself, and you showed up as the person you've become because of everything you just went through. That's it, guys. I hope you have a wonderful day. Hopefully this is of value to you. Have a good one.